Netcasts you love.
From people you trust. This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode number 70 for May 14th, 2010. Mac gets steamy. Hi everybody, welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, your weekly dose of hardware goodies and discussion. I am Ryan Shrout, joined once again by Patrick Norton. Hello, Patrick.
Hey, Ryan. How's it going, man?
Doing well, doing well. And we have Colleen with us again in studio. I think if we're doing a countdown on official episodes, is this your second to last official?
Yeah, next week is my last official episode. Unless Leo lets me back on, but... You know.
I'm sorry that I won't be able to make your May 21st party, going away party, but
at least you were invited.
Well, yeah, that's true, yeah. Oh, wait, I wasn't. I just heard a...
Did somebody pull the plug on him? That wasn't...
On who,
okay,
on me?
Now you're back. You glitched out there for a second.
Somebody wasn't happy about not being invited to the party, I guess. So, but no, Colleen will be with us for another couple of episodes. I'm sure I think we'll be able to have Colleen on. Maybe not every week, still, but
I could be a recurring character.
It could be, yeah, exactly. You know, it'll be. You never know when she'll show up, so you have to subscribe and download every episode 3 or 4 times in order to make sure. So we've got a lot of stuff in our list here. A lot of it outside of maybe the normal computer components, which I think is good. We're going to talk about the Sprint HTC Evo 4G that I desperately want and need. We're going to talk.
I think all of us kind of desperately want and need that, don't we?
My want is tempered a lot now that they've let some of the monthly fees
pricing
out. But
might be.
We can. I actually realized that maybe their pricing isn't as obnoxious as I thought. It's just frustrating, but. We should save that for later.
Menu pricing will tend to do that. We'll talk about the possibility of 3 terabyte hard drives. We'll talk about our favorite streaming gaming service called OnLive and their move into British telecom space and a lot of other stuff. The first thing I wanted to mention rather quickly is into the world of SSDs and storage. I know a lot of people that listen to this show that are excited about enthusiast hardware in general. One of the, I would say, on our PC Perspective podcast that we also do on this network, the most common questions we get are, should I upgrade my processor, graphics card, or should I get an SSD? And what's interesting to me about that is
we
not
pretty
too long
much
ago,
always say the same thing.
Right. Well, depending on your use case, but yeah, we still in general had the same answer. But it's funny because you think about before SSDs came around, did anybody ever talk about upgrading their storage systems really?
No.
Not very often. I mean, it was RAID 0 or not to do RAID 0, right?
Did you say yes?
I said yes because I've been dealing with so much with video and with a completely unhinged lossless music collection that like on my notebooks and stuff, like once I hit 100 gigabytes, never really thought about upgrading them unless there was something really fast that came out. But with desktops, I've actually been upgrading hardware or I should say hard drives pretty consistently, partially because I despise RAID 0 and its propensity to puke all over everything useful in my life.
I love RAID 0 so much.
Death Wish RAID, as it is oft called around these parts.
Patrick, do you know of my Death Wish RAID setup in my computer?
I should be afraid. Humorous.
I have 5 used hard drives in RAID 0.
Because, you want to prove how valuable backups are.
Well, no. What it is those are all of my Steam games. So if I lose them,
so it's not a big deal.
It doesn't matter. It's just a local copy of something that doesn't... So, yeah.
I agree. But so when you're talking about upgrading, we were talking about more capacity, but you weren't... there wasn't a whole lot that you could do for storage performance other than getting,
more
RAID 5, getting higher-end RAID cards and that kind of stuff. But with SSDs, that really changed, and we started to have a new debate whether or not you wanted super fast storage or you wanted high capacity storage and whether or not you needed both and that kind of stuff.
And there was a lot of talk of hybrid drives also.
And then those never really panned out because essentially all you're getting there is a larger cache on a traditional spindle-based hard drive.
I think SSDs are scaling. I guess to say scaling down so quickly. I think they're just going to stomp. They're going to be a couple hybrid. I'm sure somebody will market a hybrid drive, and everybody will look at it and go, "Oh, why don't I just buy a SSD and put my operating system and primary applications on that?" And then I'll buy a second SSD and I'll use it as my scratch drive for Photoshop and other applications. Right. And then I'll recycle my old hard drive to use for all my data.
Right, which is exactly what I've been doing with systems throughout the last couple of years as SSDs became important. But what was interesting here this week was, I don't know how familiar you are with the controllers that are in these SSDs, Patrick, but there was one called from a company called Sandforce. It was the SF1200, and it was very, very fast. They were a newcomer to the world of storage controllers. They were beating the Intel in terms of performance, but they were not beating them in terms of price per gigabyte, so in terms of the overall value of the drive. But they were fast, and that was one thing to like about it. Well, they released in 100 gigabyte and 200 gigabyte drives. Well, what happened recently was OCZ, one of the biggest sellers of SSDs to the consumer market, and one of the bigger Sandforce partners, came out with a firmware that tweaks a couple of things, essentially allows the controller to not save. Basically, if you bought a 100 gig drive, you actually had 128 gigs of flash memory in the SSD itself, but it was using a lot of that capacity to over provision to help itself in terms of swapping data back and forth and helping it keep the performance up. Well, they're able they figured out eventually that they could tweak the firmware and cut that provisioning down quite a bit. So now there's a firmware update that will be available to users of OCZ-based Sandforce drives that will move your 100 gig drive up to 120 gig drive with just a firmware update.
Is there any downside to that? Because part of the whole point of having the extra storage is to make up for maybe if any transistors die, or primarily as you're moving data around the hard drive, because the writing on SSDs is so peculiar compared to everything else.
Yes.
Do you see any downside on that? It makes me a little uptight. On the flip side, it's like it's 25% gain in capacity, which
it's huge,
exciting. Yeah.
What's interesting is the downside was supposed to be performance, and what they either figured it out how to fix it so the controller didn't need that much over provisioning to perform as well, because the benchmarks we did on the newer drive with this updated firmware were almost identical, like within 0.5% of the original one. Some people had questioned whether or not this will affect the longevity of the drive. I don't think that will be the case. If you look at, for example, a lot of other drives already do this. 128 gigs of flash equals 120 gigs of accessible SSD storage, so to speak. Obviously, partitioning changes all that. But Sandforce was going further down that line, and so basically they're stepping back into what the Samsung controllers have done and the J-Micron controllers have done since really the beginning of consumer SSD. So I don't think there are any downsides to it. I can't say for 100%, but I don't think longevity is the issue, and I don't think, and obviously we tested it, the performance is not the issue. So they're going to release new drives that have these new firmwares, and what is, I think, even better for listeners of the show, viewers of the show, is that if you already have one of these, you don't have to feel like you got cheated, because they're going to release a firmware that will give you essentially 20 gigs of storage for free on your SSD. So always
if you're thinking about buying a drive, you should probably still wait till the end of this year. It seems like they're pushing to almost double capacity by the holiday shopping season this year.
It's tough to say. Nobody wants to say on record, for obviously, because they know what it would do to current sales. And we'd already heard from Intel that they are going to have, right now they max out at 160 gig SSD, and they said we will have a 320 sometime in 2010. But I think they're waiting for a process shrink on flash memory going down to the 22 nanometer, I believe.
Wow.
So I think we're talking late 2010 for that. And I trust me, I hope that price per gigabyte drops like a rock on these drives, because I like them so much. But I don't, like right now, a good drive is going to run you anywhere from $250 to $3 a gig. And I don't think we're going to see that drop to like 150 or anything before the end of the year, unfortunately. I think it'll drop some.
Hey, long now calculator. We can have a bet on this one.
Hey, and as a bet, I'll be glad to lose. Actually, I'll buy you a beer or get you a dinner if it means $1 per gigabyte SSDs by the end of this year. I think most people would love that. So yeah, that's kind of our SSD update for the week. Now, there was something else interesting happened. I don't know. Actually, this is an interesting question. Patrick, are you a Mac user at all?
Yes, I use Mac and Windows, and I pretty much live in Windows 7 and OS 10, and I spend a fair amount of time in Penguin Linux and Ubuntu.
Oh, okay. Okay, so all right.
I'm all over the map.
I have to admit, I do not spend any regular time inside any Linux operating system unless I'm fixing a server, and when I'm doing that, I hate it the entire time I'm in there. That's always because I'm fixing stuff.
Linux disk. It makes everything happy.
So what are your thoughts then on the announcement, well, the beta release of Steam for the Mac, and then the announcement that Valve is going to bring Steam to Linux as well?
I don't really game on Linux. I know a lot of people who live full-time in Linux who are probably dancing on the ceiling with joy right now. I think it's great.
Right.
It's a developer treat.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that hard to migrate the OS 10 code over to Linux because, I mean, they're essentially unices. One's based on BSD, but they're all Unix at the core. I'll probably be beaten publicly when I wander out of here to go to dinner lately by an angry BSD enthusiast.
I was chastised last night for making such a claim. Actually, I think I said Mac OS X was based on Linux, and then I was wrapped on the head. So, yeah, I know it went real bad. But Colleen, you were going to say something about just the Steam on Mac in general?
I think that Steam on Mac is a more significant thing than Steam on Linux for a number of users. The reason being that I think it's more likely that a Linux user would install Windows on their machine and be able to play games just fine than a Mac user would be able to do the same thing. Does that make sense? And I mean, also Linux people, not much gets between them and their games anyway.
It's interesting. My first thought would have almost been the opposite. That usually when I think of Linux users, I think of people that hate Microsoft and would never install Windows. Period.
Yeah,
whereas Mac users
are and they're telling you that as they're playing World of Warcraft on their Windows install.
Well, what about things like Wine? I know there's been a lot of work on Wine, which is, what does that stand for? I don't know, but allows you to run Windows applications natively in Linux.
It works better for some things than others.
Right.
Yes.
I haven't seen it. I haven't seen anybody really espousing it for gaming recently. Perhaps I haven't been listening in the right areas. I think it's great for Steam. I think it's great for anybody that lives in Linux. I think it'll be great for, it'd be interesting to see if they're doing that because are they seeing a lot of potential gaming in South America or China where they're running a lot more people proportionally maybe are running Linux operating systems. It'd be kind of interesting to find out if it's part of some international campaign or if it's just because the developers are like, hey, we all like Linux. Let's port it over, dude.
I bet it's partially that. I bet it's that they already did the cross-platform work to make it work on OS 10, so why not just make it work on Linux?
Yeah, and I think that the move to OS 10 is obviously they're seeing the increase in popularity of Mac and MacBook Pros and iMacs and that kind of stuff, and a lot of people don't want to have to buy a separate Windows license legally or illegally purchase or download an ISO. Yeah, it is to do boot camp or to do.
But it's a pain. Anything to do with 3D graphics on Linux.
Yeah, usually it is. You're right. Now, I do have to say, we did some testing, and Ken's actually...
anything, often.
Okay. Ken is actually in the other room editing a video that we did on running Steam on the Mac, and we used this MacBook Pro that has integrated discrete graphics. And one of the things that was interesting, the only real kind of classic PC game that's on there right now is Portal. Team Fortress 2 is coming, but Portal is kind of the de facto one for right now, which is why I have my weighted companion cube sitting here with me. But what we noticed, the first thing I did actually was install Steam and download Portal and play it. And, it defaulted to 1152 by 720 resolution for some reason, as opposed to the native 1440 by 900 screen. So I upped that and, left most of the settings at default. And using the discrete 9600M graphics card in this MacBook Pro. So this is the generation right before the ones that just came out, I think. That's the first unibody. So it played pretty well. We were able to play Portal. It was like, averaging kind of Portal's in the 30s to mid 30s frame rates. It's not a real intensive game. The settings weren't completely maxed out. I think we had 2x anti-aliasing and 2x anisotropic filtering and that kind of stuff. And it was a playable experience. What was interesting to me was that when I installed Boot Camp and put Windows 7 on it, the first thing you notice is that, hey, I can update the drivers on the Windows partition on it, because I just went to nvidias.com, downloaded their notebook drivers that now work on basically all notebook computers. You don't have to worry about getting one specifically from your notebook vendor. And I ran the same Portal game, and the first thing I noticed when I turned it on, I was like, wow, that looks better. And it turns out that there are image quality settings that exist. Because, also keep in mind, I guess, it's running DirectX on Windows. It's running OpenGL in Mac. So it's running a different code path. But high dynamic range isn't available on the Mac version. There were certain reflection options that weren't available, and it was very obvious when I started playing the Windows version. I was like, wow, this actually looks better. And not only that, it looked better and it performed. We were getting frame rates in the 60s and 70s, so it was almost double the frame rate. And in my opinion, it looked significantly better, or notably better, what you're getting on the Mac. So while I think it's good that they're bringing it, I guess I'm saying it's still not ideal. It's better than nothing. I think
it's a good start.
How much of that has to do with? Oh, sorry, Colleen.
I think a lot of the thing is that they keep coming out with new versions of OpenGL. I think that we're going to be seeing more advanced versions of OpenGL and better implementations. Sure. I think in the long run, I see no reason why there can't be Mac-based games that are equally as pretty and as fast. But currently, I suspect that you're right.
So you were gonna add something else to that, Patrick, or
just say how much of that is a decision? I tend to I think of Steve Jobs as approving all decisions inside of Apple on an individual basis, and it's like how much of that was the decision to support OpenGL and the relative lack of development for gaming performance on OpenGL, and also just out of curiosity, how much of that is the hardware that's available on OS X machines. They might not have you know what I mean? Like you have to work pretty hard to find a Mac with a really serious graphics card if you haven't purchased a desktop.
Oh no, you're right.
Right, but he was saying
you have to go to Mac Pro.
But he was saying on the same Mac, one Windows install, one OS X install.
Correct.
But I think that's also again, that has to do with the fact that the Windows team has spent a lot more time. Microsoft, I should say, spent a lot more time and a lot more money improving the code.
Well, yeah, they invented DirectX.
Yeah,
but
that's true.
DirectX. They invented DirectX. I remember the original people who invented DirectX was invented to pry DOS hacks out of the Windows operating system, essentially, and to give a relatively equal platform for game developers and to standardize the relationship between graphics cards and the applications without trying to bypass the operating system. But they did all of that because they felt gaming was an important part of the Windows platform, and I just don't think OS X. I should say, I don't know if Apple's really cared about games.
Well, they just support OpenGL,
right? And it's good enough for a 3D graphics package or a 3D rendering tool, or a CAD CAM program. But I think they think about it as something where they're not thinking in terms of 70 frames per second. They're thinking about terms of, is it good enough for somebody who's doing 3D rendering or something like that.
Isn't it like the classic Reddit thing? But can it play Doom?
You can play Doom in a freaking browser now.
You can play.
You can play Quake 3 in the browser very, very well. So that's all frightening.
I gotta say, I've been finding Portal on Macs glitchy. So
you mean like the actual in-game play? But
yeah, last night I was playing, and I had to start messing with random settings to make it not just turn white after a couple of seconds. And then
we played a lot of that. We didn't have any of that, but I mean, it's a beta, and it's the first game, that's being. It's the first. I think I'm trying to think. I was reading somewhere the last real native
last night.
The last real native game release for Mac was in 2007 or something like that. Like major mainstream game, like that was released both with PC and Mac. So, but it's interesting to see. We'll see progression on this platform, I'm sure. Now that Valve is in the market, we'll see other game developers start to do that, and we'll probably see NVIDIA hopefully try to upgrade their drivers and that kind of stuff, and same with ATI, as often on Mac as they do on Windows.
Well, speaking of the devil, I'm getting an update on Steam on the Mac right here, right now. We got one last night.
That was one I got yesterday, I think, 33 megs.
But remember, yesterday on the show, I got another 33 meg update, and I have it in the computer.
Now, the other thing we want to talk about is we're talking about British Telecom. You would think, hey, Ryan, this is a show about computer hardware. What's it got to do with
that again?
British Telecom? I think. What's it got to do?
Surely you jest, sir.
So what is this story? British Telecom buying 2.6% of a company we all know and love.
What company would that be, Ryan?
OnLive.
So OnLive is the company that does cloud-based gaming. So theoretically,
the company that intends to sell cloud-based gaming.
Right, and I mean they've done it. It works. I mean, Ryan's played it.
I have used. I did use the beta inadvertently.
But I mean, there's it's not.
They're not selling it yet.
It's not. Yeah, it's not even in beta for all intents. It's not in a public beta at this point.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so the idea is that they render everything in the cloud and stream to you video essentially of the game that you play, and you could essentially you could have a thin client dumb terminal for a console, or you could play it on a laptop or on a Mac or a PC, anything with a browser, or they probably have their own client. And it seems like British Telecom says that they purchased a stake of the company so that they could get exclusive rights to bundling that service with people who are buying broadband packages.
So that's what's interesting about this is kind of where I always thought it was going to go, right? Long story short, my experience with OnLive was not great. It was pretty good. It was better than I expected.
It worked,
but it wasn't great. It was okay for some games, like racing games. It didn't require real twitch reactions. It was perfect for kind of real basic games. StarCraft 2 would work on any RTS games, that kind of stuff. But for first-person shooters, I didn't like it, as you might expect with latency issues and that kind of stuff. But the only way I theorized this could work long-term for them was to, my local internet service provider is Insight Cable. If Insight Cable leased servers that they could put in their, rack facility, in their networking facility, and then charge me $10, $15, $20 a month to access those servers because I am physically one hop to them. It's local. It's going to be as low latency as you can get networking to be, being in the same actual network itself. That would be the only way you could get a higher percentage of games to work
using a really good CDN.
Well, not using a CDN, where actually the servers are in this, like Comcast would have their own, and they would have several locations in order to best serve their customers.
I mean, essentially your ISP is your CDN.
OnLive will be its own CDN, its own content delivery network. So I can't imagine OnLive's going to run over Akamai or Limelight or Bit Gravity. OnLive, they essentially have to combine the video distributing feature inside of their system, I think, to make any money off of this.
But the point being, the servers actually need to be physically close to the end user in order to keep latency down.
Well, ideally, unless the internet runs the way it's supposed to, and because in theory, right, the internet's supposed to take care of this, and you're not supposed to have that big of an advantage not having a server close to you. In theory, in reality, it turns out having edge caching of servers all over the place actually helps a lot more than people think.
Well,
and so this is like
of light kind of sucks.
Yeah. So what British Telecom is saying is, we like the service idea. In order for it to be an actual usable service for our customers, we need to have these servers locally. There's a comment here that says small continent equals good for latency. And you think about it, I
put that in there because
the size of Britain is
the actual
small.
text says UK gamers will also be wait. What's great about Western Europe geographically is that so many countries are within a 1,000-mile radius, which is within the latency limit for a single OnLive data center.
Right.
So that's a little different. That's not saying your ISP is running it. That's saying that there's one data center. But they're saying, like I put in the notes, small continent, good for ping times.
Right. I like your summation for it better. British Telecom buying 2.6% stake in OnLive for the rights to bundle it with their broadband package. So that to me says that no, you won't be able to get OnLive unless you have British Telecom as your internet service provider. And then this goes down the slippery slope of getting into talks of net neutrality. That's a different country and continent, so we don't really,
it's not a net neutrality issue. It's they've chosen to OnLive has chosen to partner with somebody.
Yeah, I agree. But what I'm saying is, well, if there are other internet service providers that you cannot get this through, then, or if you can get it through, but it's not going to run as fast as it would as it goes through British Telecom, something like that, which is the potential I'll say that's a potential problem for services like that here, right? So.
Well, yeah, but that's a whole different slippery slope we probably don't want to get into.
No, I don't think we do. I think you're right. But I thought that was an interesting story to bring up OnLive again and say they're not just doing this in the United States. They are still in the closed beta, as far as I can tell. I have seated many people trying to get into this closed beta and have nobody has been accepted yet. So hopefully we will.
Did you get in again?
No, you know what? Surprisingly, I did not. I did not get accepted in. No one I know
has access to it.
They don't like Ryan.
They don't like me very much because I got in when I wasn't supposed to, and I wrote about it. So
not a journalist.
I know. Colleen, what is this you put in here about Dell launching new moderately priced large LCDs? 23.
Yeah, it's just another couple of standard 21 through 24 inch. Generally large-sized LCDs from a major manufacturer. And, a lot of people buy Dell LCDs because they're cheap and available and pretty good. But,
I just bought one from the Dell outlet earlier this week.
Yeah, see, there you go.
My favorite store.
It's pretty common. I mean, and pretty much most anyone I know who has a whole facility, even full of Mac Pros, equips them with Dell monitors. They're perfectly acceptable. They're cheap. You can buy them in bulk. But the thing that I keep noticing is I'm seeing a lot more laptops and a lot more desktop monitors with 16:9 aspect ratios instead of 16:10. And I like that.
Yeah.
Oh, you don't like it?
I had a 16:10 and a 16:9 display. So I guess we should say 16:10 is 1900 by 1200 or 2560 by 1600.
It's an extra 120 pixels, dude. I mean, I've a friend of mine who's a programmer who whenever the subject of monitor comes up, he gets angrier and angrier that he can't get a 16:10 monitor anymore. And I'm like, dude, it's 120 pixels. Come on, it's a rounding error. Lighten up.
It's realistic, but it's not. But it's not 120 pixels. It's 120 times 19:20.
Excuse me. It's 120 lines on your. It's it's 120 vertical pixels. I feel bad, but it just doesn't. I'm just not missing it that much.
Why feel bad? That's fantastic. I think all monitors should be 16:9. Then our TVs and our computers are all the same aspect ratio.
And everyone should get 2 monitors with every computer they buy for free.
Wrong. 3.
And we should have ponies.
No. We should have 3. I don't like having my vision bisected.
Oh, you're an insect. You have like multiple eyeballs. 2 or 3, you're still getting. Well, I guess you. Well,
I'd rather have 3 smaller ones than 2 bigger ones.
Yeah. You need to flash a picture of your insane monitor setup that's worth more than my car.
I do that every couple of episodes.
I just want to say what we're talking about is 230,000 pixels. 1920 times 120. If I did that math.
It's 120 lines on the monitor.
Right.
But Patrick,
so I mean, that's real estate. That's real estate. I guess to me, it really doesn't matter.
I don't think you're losing. I don't see it as losing real estate. I see it as it's just a different aspect ratio.
But I mean, okay, that's fair. That's fine. The good point is cheaper monitors equals better. That's not going to be the title of this episode because we already went like one night.
No, it's not that cheaper monitors equals better. It's that 16:9 monitors equals better than 16:10. I vote yes. What do you say? Do you prefer that all of your content gets letterboxed?
I prefer 16:10.
It's going to get letterboxed anyway. Anything that was shot in 235:1 is going to be letterboxed. Anything that's 4:3 is going to be window by.
Yeah, most stuff I watch though is 16:9. I think.
TV is, but movies usually aren't, right? Is that right?
DVDs, Blu-rays, 16:9.
No, actually, I mean it may be 16:9, but it's still designed to have black, basically to be letterboxed above and below. Anything that wasn't shot in 16:9 natively.
Okay.
So, modern television, a lot of sports, some recent movies.
I think you can go either way, but
I just find most of the content I watch is 16:9, and I prefer it. I also kind of like having it wider, but relative to the aspect ratio for building a laptop in particular.
I just like the
shape.
27-inch monitors to come down in price at this point.
27s, though, tend to have really low resolution densities, I find.
Right, 19:12 or something like that.
They're just really big freaking pixels.
That's okay. Put them farther away. It's the Kel factor.
But, okay, so you don't care, Ryan, or you do care?
No, I would prefer 16:10.
Okay, how about you?
It doesn't bother me either way. I'm just excited that ultra-sharp monitors have gotten really cheap.
And it's IPS. I vote 16:9. Anyway, on to the next story.
The next story is how much the Air Force hates Sony, apparently. This happened a couple of weeks ago. Sony announced that the PlayStation 3 was going to drop support for other operating systems.
Yeah, there was a little tab where it could be install other OS.
Right, which was a feature of the system when they launched and was touted as a feature of here's some of the cool stuff you can do. And with the latest firmware upgrade, I don't know what the numbers are anymore, but it looks like Sony has not just said we're not going to support future updates to this. We're actually physically removing it. Obviously, because something they're trying to do.
Not physically doing anything, but.
Well, yeah, right. But if you upgrade to the firmware, you will not be able to run your operating system even if you had it previously installed on your PlayStation 3. Which is required
if you're playing on the PlayStation Network, but not if you're, a research facility that's just using a cluster of PS3s. But
the short version of this story is that because Sony has decided to lock out Linux on all new hardware and all units coming from repair, the Air Force, which has this amazing, I think it's like 1,700 or 2,000.
Like 2,500.
I think it turns out the Ars Technica says it was like scaled back from 2,200. They purchased 300 something, and they were supposed to have purchased 2,200, but they've actually purchased like 1,700. In any case, they have this massive cluster of cell processors that do high definition video processing and do it very, very cheap because the PS3 is the cheapest way to get a hold of a cell processor, and they had Linux support. However, because of there's basically these units die, especially if you stack them in huge racks and have maybe limited ventilation.
Yeah, the picture is just them in baker's racks.
Yeah. Well, you build something on the cheap. You build it on the cheap, right? You use what's available.
Yeah, that's true.
But they're saying like to build a cluster out of Xeons would cost, the Ars Technica is reporting that it would cost an order of magnitude more than to build it out of PS3. So they had this great low-cost way to do this high-definition video rendering on the cheap, right? Saving taxpayers dollars, but because Sony's turned off Linux, they can no longer replace units as they go down in the PS3 racks of hellish rendering, I guess we'll call it.
Yeah, what's interesting is you were talking about saving taxpayers money. The contract for this was only $663,000, which is a lot of money. But I'm guessing in terms of government computing research projects, that's about as cheap as they get.
Yeah, well, they're saying like the Ars Technica article says if they built the cluster out of Xeons, it would have cost an order of magnitude greater. It's a factor of 10, so it would have turned it into a $6 million project.
There you go.
So that's a bummer.
It wouldn't have happened.
Well, yeah.
Teraflops heterogeneous cluster powered by PS3s.
But I mean, and really, they're taking advantage of the fact that Sony specifically does not really take a profit because they're expecting to make it up in licensing for the software.
Sure, that's a good point, actually. But
Sony's not going to care that much. But on the other hand, Sony loves it that people are like, doing stuff like this for their consoles. Great marketing. So
yeah, exactly. Sony loved the fact that the Air Force was willing to do this because they got huge promotion out of it.
I think the main reason I wanted to point this out is that a lot of people felt burned that this feature was removed from their PS3 when they thought they were buying it. Even if they weren't planning on using it, they felt like, well, maybe I will. Maybe when I'm not playing games on it anymore, I want to mess around with it. But they thought that's something that they bought in their console, and then Sony took it away.
Yeah, it's hard to not feel for that segment. It's one thing to have never been offered something. It's one thing to have been offered it and then have it taken away. Like,
there's already been a class action lawsuit filed, so 3 or 4 years we'll see a settlement on that one.
Yeah, we'll each get $2 in the mail.
Well, the Air Force you get like $2,500 or something.
Patrick, you had something in here talking about Y-Gig. You sent an email to me and you said Y-Gig, and I thought, what? I was
why not?
What is this Y-Gig thing? Tell me what Y-Gig is.
So basically, there's the Wi-Fi Alliance and the Wireless Gigabit Alliance, which were setting themselves up for a long-term battle to the deaths of the next generation of wireless networking standards. Rather than create the next Wi-Fi N and spend years wasting potential adoption time, they decided to work together, and they have the next generation. They basically settle on the next generation Wi-Fi spec that's being peddled to all the network vendors. So it's going to be running on 60 gigahertz, basically on the 60, instead of being like 2.4 or 5 gigahertz, it's 60 gigahertz. They're claiming top end of 7 gigabits per second, which is, I think, 10 times as fast as the top end for Wi-Fi N, and they're calling it Y-Gig. It has a very soft kind of logo that goes along with that. The downside is that you're trading off, much like in my personal experience with Wi-Fi N, is you're trading off a lot of range in exchange for the speed. So you're going to end up with probably, if you want to cover your house with Y-Gig, you might end up needing 2 or 3 base stations to do it. But this, if you're thinking about being able to replace gigabit Ethernet, which in some level I'm suspecting I'm never going to be able to replace until fiber becomes cheap, because I loves me some cables and I loves me some problem-free network connections.
I think the one part that I really, really, really wish came out tomorrow would be 10 gigabit Ethernet over copper.
Yeah, or 100 gigabit Ethernet over copper.
Yeah, but I don't think there is such thing as 100 gigabit Ethernet over copper.
Just wait 20 minutes. Somebody will start working on the spec. But it's interesting, before anybody gets, pushes off their plans to upgrade to, say, N or pull gigabit Ethernet through their house, Cat 5 or Cat 6, preferably Cat 6 if it's a long run. We're talking, I think, 2013 before this hits the streets.
What about having a usage model where you have multiple access points inside of a router, which my current router already has, and if you're really close to it, you get gigabit speeds, and if you're a little bit farther away, you get N speeds, and if you're a little bit farther away, you get B speeds, and just have it kind of taper off.
Well, if they're really running at 60 gigahertz, if it's at a frequency of 60 gigahertz, that's a really short wavelength. The shorter the wavelength is, the more likely it is to be absorbed. The more likely it is to be absorbed by the 2x4s in the sheetrock in your walls.
Hence
I think it's going to be a dramatically fast taper to no signal whatsoever.
But that's what I mean is, what if you ran those 3 access points simultaneously on those 3 different frequencies with the ability for it to switch off as it gets too far away? That way, you walk in the same room, you have gigabit wirelessly. You walk out of the room, you have N.
I don't want to downgrade from, because think about it. Every time we've seen, running B on a G network, running G on an N network, we've downgraded the entire speed of the network to the slowest Wi-Fi standard. I'm just going to run multiple, assuming I'm still interested in wireless connectivity in 2013. I think I'm just going to end up running multiple Y-Gig routers inside of my house.
It'd be kind of cool if you could do that, just install every power plug in your house is a Y-Gig emitter or something.
Well, and at that point, powerline Ethernet finally actually works in a reasonable.
No, it's never going to work.
No, actually, I've got some friends that are running and quite happily.
I run it at home right now.
Yeah, that's what they all say. You guys are paid. Paid.
I use powerline networking to connect my router in my office in the top floor of my house to the Sling player in my bedroom. It's connected to that TV. And also I use it to connect to the consoles downstairs at the TV. So I have a switch hooked up to the powerline networking box that goes up to my router. And it's not fast. It's, we're talking at that distance in my house with all the electrical noise, maybe 10 or 12 megabits. But it's more than fast enough for gaming. But the issue is it's reliable. I've never had it drop out like we've had Wi-Fi.
I've never gotten one of those to work. I mean, I tried the Sling Links from my dad's house to get a Sling catcher on his television.
There's two things. One, in the last year, they've really gotten a lot better than they were previously. Sometime around a year ago, they started to get really usable. The other thing is if the house, depending on how the house is wired, you may not be able to get from point A to point B because essentially if the outlets are on different circuits, they don't really jump circuits. The power line for Ethernet doesn't really jump circuits well.
It doesn't do it well because the ones that I have, I believe, are rated at 300 megabits. And the fastest I've been able to get plugging them into, different outlets on the same circuit, like in the same room and stuff, is somewhere like in the 80 range, which again is not bad, but it's not even close to what they're rated at. And that's been my problem with powerline networking, is not getting close to what they're actually rated at. But if you want a consistent, reliable, not cheap, but it's easy to install, then powerline networking works well in my house. But it's a newer house, it's been built in the last 5 or 6 years, and that probably has a lot to do with it too. So interference can be a real big problem.
Yeah, as Jim, I know when Jim was doing this in a friend's house, like the Belkin stuff failed, but Netgear's, Jim Louderback, sorry, my boss here at Revision 3, or my boss's boss here at Revision 3, but the Netgear WNHDE111 actually worked really well. The Belkin stuff at that time was not working very well.
Yeah, I think the one in my house is Linksys, and I now have a passion
stop
of
working in about
distrust
20 minutes for no reason at all.
That tends to be my case with the routers, but these have been working well. So move along.
Speaking of upstream bandwidth, I ran into the bandwidth police at Comcast.
Yeah, I heard that.
Yeah, so you know how they say that there's 250 gigabyte caps?
There really are.
You just have to quadruple them for 4 months in a row, and then they'll shut you off. So looks like you're looking for a new ISP. They turned me back on with a warning, but
no,
not for 50 megabits service, but when you have 3 other roommates that are geeks and do a lot of IPTV streaming and
gigabytes and gigabytes.
Yeah,
I should point out
terabytes actually.
The product name, the Netgear product, the WNHDE111, is a wireless access point to bridge Ethernet to 802.11n. I will have to search around for the Powerline Ethernet product that works.
Oh, the other model number?
Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough. Speaking of storage, we had off-site storage with Carbonite. Let's talk about on-site storage and the potential for seeing 3 terabyte hard drives this year. So this is a story that, Patrick, you linked to out of non-tech that says they are hearing that Seagate roadmaps have leaked to the potential of a 3 terabyte SAS drive being released this year.
Yeah, so that's the Constellation ES, which is like an enterprise server drive,
right?
And then like a 1 terabyte version of the 2.5-inch Barracuda ES. But they're basically saying like sometime by the end of the year, 3 terabyte drives for enterprise, which in theory we could see 3 terabyte drives. That's what they're suggesting in the article, 3 terabyte hard drives by the end of the year. But you're looking at like 17 gigabytes $1 for those. They're saying 17 gigabytes $1 for 2 terabyte level consumer acceptance. The 2 terabyte drives have gotten so cheap.
Yeah, I know.
So
we talked about that last week.
Yeah, it's a lot of people are speculating, like, just is a 3 terabyte drive actually going to sell? Are people happy with 2 terabyte drives? It'll be fun to watch.
I think there's instances where even paying a ridiculously large amount more per terabyte still makes sense. For example, if you have a RAID array in a SAN that you want to upgrade, it would cost you an exorbitantly more amount of money to get a second one of those and fill that up with 2 terabyte drives than it is.
But if you're not using something like a Drobo, you have to own a second SAN because you have to have a second box that's large enough to move all the data off the first box so you can upgrade all the hard drives, unless it allows you to manually upgrade individual hard drives.
Right, or unless you have someone that can temporarily loan you the space and you move it off slowly and then you move it back on. No, it's entirely plausible. That happens all the time. You know, your old co-host does that regularly.
It would be interesting to find out, like, if from Western Digital and Seagate and oh my goodness, I can't think of the other vendor.
Hitachi.
Thank you, Hitachi. Who buys the majority of the drives? Are they going to consumer sales? What percentage go into OEM sales versus end user retail sales? It'd be really interesting to see who buys the majority of hard drives, because that might really dictate, where they drive these, 3 terabyte drives. Like, okay, so it's a checkbox feature, so people can say, "Oh, I got the new 3 terabyte hard drive," But I'd be curious to see how many people are actually, videographers or photographers who take 1 billion pictures every 3 days, or people archiving their Blu-ray collections where they're like, "Oh, there's another movie that's 50 gigabytes." It'd be interesting to have a vendor talk about where the majority of their drives go. I think
we could probably do that. We could probably get some of that information, or maybe even have a guest speaker come in from one of those companies, give us some of that information. It'd be interesting. Yeah. But I know at least one person, PC Perspective's own Alan Malventano, that would be buying 3 terabyte drives if they were ever actually released this year. I think he was one of the few. He was one of the people that predicted we wouldn't see any increases after the 2 terabyte. Because of platter densities, but not that we would never see them, but that we probably wouldn't see them this year. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see how that comes up.
We need to go back to double height 6.9 platter, 6.9 12 platter drives.
Exactly. The last thing we're going to talk about here is the thing I teased at the beginning of the show: the Sprint HTC Evo 4G. It will be available on June 4th for $199 with a new contract. $450 before the discounts. I have to say, I do want to point out, I'm a little bit upset or nervous at this release date that they didn't check with me, because I will actually be in Taiwan on June 4th for a show, and I won't be back until June 5th at like 6 a.m., and I'm not going to go straight from the airport to a Sprint store.
I thought you were hardcore, dude.
You know what?
You're going to go straight from the. The truth is, you should fly back early in case they do one of those classic, like, we make 8 of them, and then we can tell everybody in a big press release that they sold out of the initial run, like they do with gaming consoles. But dude, why would you not directly go from the airport to the Sprint store? You can have breakfast in between.
Well, the issue would be, I think they'd be sold out already, because I wouldn't be here to the 5th. So you're right. I'd have to come back a whole day early in order to go straight to the store.
Didn't you get married for a reason?
So I could send my wife out to get my phone.
Precisely.
I don't think that's going to go over very well. You ask her
for my phone.
Good luck with that, Colleen.
Yeah.
And this is why I'm not married.
So what do you know about here, the pricing? Because you made a comment earlier to me in the show that you thought maybe at first when you were looking at the pricing schemes that they were kind of, ripping people off because it was such a new hot phone. But maybe they're not doing as much.
I didn't say ripping people off. It was painful, right? So it's $199 is the subsidized price. $450 is what they're saying the price is before discounts. There's a mandatory $10 a month premium data add-on on top of the regular monthly phone fee. The trade-off for that, of what I've been reading online, is that you'll get unlimited 3G, which is cool because everybody's like unlimited 4G, which is great if you live in Dallas or one of the other 17 places where they have 4G. That's one of the big selling points. It's like you get unlimited 4G. We don't know when 4G is coming to San Francisco. It'll probably be later this year, but 4G is coming to the entire Sprint network. So for the extra $10 a month, you get unlimited data, which is nice.
That's cool.
But the thing that I was really excited about, which was the 8-device Wi-Fi hotspot feature, is going to cost you $30 a month. And
in addition to everything else.
In addition to everything else, and I was pissed. Yeah. And then I realized in Sprint size that $30 a month is replacing the $60 a month you'd be paying for a Sprint Overdrive or a MiFi or a USB modem. So in that sense, it's kind of a price reduction because I've got a Sprint Overdrive now that I pay $60 a month for. It's my mobile internet access. Yeah, my mobile hotspot. So,
Yep.
you know, so in that sense, okay, it doesn't sound too bad. On the flip side, like that's going to be once you get your phone plan, your data plan, your $10 a month and your $30 a month for your hotspot, that monthly number is going to look really huge.
Yeah, but what's kind of a disappointing thing for me is that I have a MiFi $60 a month 3G device. We'll have, they did say we'll have 4G here in Cincinnati before the end of the year, but I don't know how much longer my contract is on that 3G card that I have now, because I think it was one of those, you know, you buy it, you get it for free for a 2-year contract. So am I going to have to pay for both or not get the Wi-Fi hotspot functionality on the Evo phone while the contract is still going on this? We'll have to see how receptive Sprint is to change on that regard.
You could write it off. You could turn it over to the corporation for use as the corporate Wi-Fi mobile spot.
Now they did say, I don't know if this is a big deal, but Sprint says there's a guaranteed 30-day satisfaction warranty on this phone, and they would even refund the activation charge, which I think they don't actually normally do. They might, because I was actually talking about the Sprint is they're really adamant they want people to try their network, they want people to try their products, and it's a 30-day window for returns. I think you get pretty much everything back. I'm not sure. I remember being shocked that the activation fee didn't really piss me off, because I remember in the past having a Sprint activation fee and it being like the equivalent of a month's service at the time. So I have to say,
driver's seat.
Yeah. I'm excited about the phone. I've been a Sprint customer since the Palm Pre came out. I've been a Sprint network user since the Palm Pre came out. I was a Sprint mobile broadband user with a USB or the MiFi card for at least 2 years before that, and I've actually been very impressed with their network. So I'm more than willing to give them another shot with an awesome new phone. A lot of people are talking about the iPhone, whether or not they'll make an announcement before this June 4th release date and all that kind of stuff. We'll have to see if that should happen. Yeah, I would be surprised if something else doesn't come from Apple about the next iPhone before June 4th. But hey, we'll see. All right, we're not finished yet. We're gonna do a handful of Twitter questions before we end today's episode. Let's see. We've got a set here. I'll go ahead and read this first one because it's from a name I can't pronounce. Fyanez.
Fyanez.
Fyanez. I like that. We'll go with that. What is the
fine ass? And I'm probably going to say that on the show.
Oh no, we don't want to say that. No, oops. What's the best way to add a SATA hard drive to an older PC that currently uses an IDE hard drive?
Upgrading the motherboard.
Yeah, if your motherboard doesn't support SATA, you're going to either need to upgrade your motherboard or get an add-in card. I think you can still get, I'm sure you can, PCI-based SATA cards. So you could do that if you really want to. If you have a motherboard that is still only has IDE on it, that's really old, right? I'm trying to think. It's got to be 4 or 5 plus, more maybe. That old, right, to not have any SATA on it. It's one thing to have IDE and SATA, but to not have any SATA. So if you have no SATA on your motherboard, you're not gonna be able to do it on that platform. You can get a PCI add-in card.
They're like $20.
Yeah, I mean it'll be cheap if you want to go that route. You're going to be limited to, what is that? 100 mega? Is it? I don't know. PCI. It's been so long. PCI runs at 33 megahertz. That should be enough bandwidth for a traditional standard hard drive. That's PCI Express. That won't work. It's got to be PCI. If their motherboard doesn't have SATA, it sure as hell doesn't have PCI Express on it. So you have to find a legacy.
I'll find one with more on it. Okay.
Find a card with more gold pins on it. So wow, those are your options. Upgrade motherboard. Find an add-in card. Colleen will look for one while we go through our rest of our questions. You want to take the next one, Patrick?
Sure. We've got Light Sworn. Can the glasses from Envision work with the new 3D HD TV sold at Best Buy, or will they have to change glasses for each 3D output? Oh boy. If you're thinking like if you have the 3D TV glasses from NVIDIA that work with gaming on your computer monitor, NVIDIA has just announced very recently. We were talking about this on HD Nation a couple weeks ago. NVIDIA's 3D TV Play software, which will let you use your NVIDIA GPU-powered glasses to do gaming on your flat panel on your new 3D compatible HD TV. ... I do not believe those NVIDIA glasses are going to work with regular 3D HD TV programming that comes off of your flat panel or monitor or projector or whatever it is. Go ahead.
It's actually, so the 3D TV Play software will let you use the power of the GPU in your laptop or computer to send 3D capable video to your TV. However, I don't think you don't get to use. I don't think you use the 3D vision glasses. I think you use the 3D TV's glasses technology, because the idea was that it will support both, the polarized or active shutter glasses, depending on whatever TV you're using. So I don't think you can actually use the 3D vision glasses on anything but 120 hertz 3D vision ready panels or the laptop. So I think if you buy a 3D TV at Best Buy, it will come with 1 or 2 sets of glasses, I think, right? And the NVIDIA 3D TV Play software will let you use those glasses that came from your Panasonic or your Samsung TV.
You are absolutely correct. It'll let you use the 3D TV Play plus your GeForce GPU plus your Windows 7 or Windows Vista PC plus a monitor, and the glasses that came with the monitor will do 3D playback. Primarily for gaming or stuff that comes off of your PC. So, no, the glasses from Envision, unless I think Panasonic TVs, HD TVs, may be compatible with the technology used in the Envision glasses, but I'm almost positive most people are going to have to buy another set of 3D glasses to use with their HD TV. It's fun to be an early adopter.
It is fun to be an early adopter. Hopefully he hasn't bought the Envision stuff, because that was when we talked about 3D Play on here. I was like, it kind of almost makes 3D Vision, pushes it aside, because really what you want to do is get one that's going to work with your TV, because then you can use that software. It'll work with your PC games. It'll work with the 3D Blu-ray playback software, whatever that is that's available, and that stuff. And plus you'll be able to use it for broadcast 3D, console-based, or not console-based, but external Blu-ray players that support 3D and that kind of stuff too. So you have more options going that way.
Here, I found you a card with more pins.
There is a PCI-based SATA card. And how much is it?
It's $30, but you can find them for $20.
Yeah, so $20-$30 for that if you feel like you need to keep that computer relevant. How's that? Is that a nice way of putting that? I don't want to say.
Yeah, you might just want to buy another motherboard, but
All right, our next question comes from Alex Hackney. I do video production in a small growing company running out of HD space, low budget NAS. Will FreeNAS iSCSI let me edit HD? I feel like this question came from the Twit Cottage.
No.
I do video production in a small growing company running out of HD space, and it's like directed at Colleen because they wanted them to read this.
Well, I'll admit I like FreeNAS, but I've never gotten the iSCSI functionality to work with FreeNAS. I see no reason why you won't be able to build your own iSCSI-based FreeNAS SAN, essentially, and if you saturate gigabit Ethernet, you'll get 80 megabytes per second of transfer speed. Which, can you edit HD with it? Sure. Is it ideal? No.
Is he talking about essentially using a FreeNAS box? Because iSCSI means sending a SCSI type connection over Ethernet, right?
That's correct.
Correct.
Okay, for those of us, myself included, who are not particularly familiar with this, I don't think you're going to get enough throughput over gigabit Ethernet to use it as a scratch disk.
If you saturate gigabit Ethernet with iSCSI, you'll get 80 megabytes a second. With jumbo frames, you might be able to get a little bit higher, and that's about the speed of a single internal hard drive for comparison. Traditional.
So basically, if you have basically he's going to have to dedicate an Ethernet network, a gigabit Ethernet network, to his connection to his FreeNAS box.
Which is not unheard of, since a lot of first off, it doesn't have to be a whole network. I mean, you know what he could also do is he could bond 2 connections through the router and use both Ethernet ports.
I think in most of the iSCSI stuff I've seen, they definitely recommend a direct connection from the NAS box to the system, which obviously defeats the purpose of having network attached storage.
I mean, ideally,
and you take it through a switch. You need to make sure it's like a good switch. It's not a slow kind of crappy one. Because when you're saturating gigabit, you're going up to about 100 megabytes per second.
With
that's
jumbo
going to get
frames.
Complicated. It's going to get hot. It needs to do. That's a lot of processing for a switch to do.
Right. But you don't want the rest of the family or anybody else in the office on the same gigabit Ethernet you're using to connect to your FreeNAS box over iSCSI.
Especially if you're doing direct editing.
But yes, it's possible is the answer. There's lots of people who do it, and that's what the Drobo Elite does. So.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I agree. It's
again, you're not. I mean, you're not going to be getting 300 megabytes per second like on a fiber channel SAN, but you can also build it out of parts laying around your house, and it's as fast as a single internal drive, and it's accessible everywhere.
I think that's a strong vote for go for it, dude.
Give it a shot and let us know how it goes.
Do it.
Or buy a Drobo Elite. That's the easy way of doing that.
Yes.
True that.
That being said, I have a case with FreeNAS on it, and I'm trying to build one myself.
You'll have to come back and tell us how it works.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, no, I mean, I would, if I had the money, I'd just buy the Drobo Elite. It works really well, but I don't have that much money.
Fair enough. The next one's easy if you want to steal that one from me, Patrick.
It's easy. It's for you, Patrick.
Couch Pyro is just I'm trying to figure out where that name came from. Is Twitch changing to Thursday for good or just this week? I believe Twitch is changing to Thursday for good so that I can be a regular contributor.
That is correct. Everything is in fluctuation here. And if you check back with us in 2 or 3 weeks, we might have moved it to Wednesdays or Fridays or something. But for now...
We moved it for Patrick, and frankly,
Thursdays
I think it was worth moving.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Next question, 805 Blue. Should I upgrade my Q6600 that running at 3.2 gigahertz to a Core i7 for video work? Is it worth it? When I first read this, I was going to say no, and then he says for video work, and I'm tempted to say yes. If you're doing something that depends on video, if you're doing something that your livelihood is on it, maybe it's not just for fun, but you actually do work. Maybe you and that guy who had you and Alex actually work in the same growing video production company. I think you will probably see a difference if you get one of the high-end Core i7s because you're talking about 8 threads instead of 4. They're not. It's still 4 cores, but they're hyper-threaded now, so you get 8 threads instead of 4. They do have better IPC instructions per clock. It's a little bit better architecture in terms of performance per clock. In that way, you do get improved integrated memory controller on the Core i7s versus the memory controller in the chipset in the Core 2 products. So there are some advantages there that I think would be worth it for you in the world of video.
Also worth it to take a look at what filters you're using the most often, what effects you're using the most often, what you do most of the time, because upgrading to an SSD for your basically a lot of people are looking at the idea of using their first SSD drive for their operating system and their primary applications.
That's what I do.
And then a second SSD drive as their scratch drive, and finding some phenomenal throughput on that. I know it works for Photoshop. I'm not sure if it would work as well for Final Cut. Well, you're probably editing on Premiere or something like that. Whether or not you are using an application that will take advantage of any acceleration in your graphics card, and whether or not you've maxed out the amount of memory you can carry in your system. We don't know which application 805 below is using, and that makes it problematic because different applications, an application that can take advantage of all the cores you can throw at it because it's properly multi-threaded, all of a sudden those 6-core, 8-core, or 6-core processors or 4-core hyper-threaded processors are really, really attractive, especially when you're rendering. But if the primary tools you're using inside of your particular editing application maybe are single-threaded or don't take advantage of more than X number of threads, suddenly that processor might not be as useful. I really will say if you're working with a lot of big video files, it may be worth your time to get an SSD drive for your primary editing drive and backing everything off to a slower spindle-based, Winchester-based hard drive for your longer archival storage.
805 really is his situation here is the poster child for everything that a high-end enthusiast computer upgrader could want, right?
Yeah.
So I'm doing video editing. Oh, well, you need the fastest processor. You also need the best hard drives. You can use as much memory as you could possibly have. The Adobe CS5 software, a lot of it takes advantage of NVIDIA Quadro-based graphics cards for GPU acceleration in After Effects and Premiere and Photoshop. Yeah. So there are lots of ways to go in that route. I think in general, not knowing anything else about your setup, a Core i7 is going to be a worthy upgrade to that. I mean, our video editing machine is based on a dual Core 2 quad configuration. So we actually have 8 cores on it. And I was still debating, well, maybe I want to move that to Core i7s. But right now we upgraded our storage to it. We put 16 gigs of RAM in it instead of 8 gigs. We're trying to keep it alive as long as we can and relevant. But when you're doing video editing, when you're doing HD video editing, talk to the editors upstairs here at the Twit Cottage. You can never have too much hardware when you're doing that. So
absolutely, more speed, video editing, audio editing, and 3D rendering and folding applications. It's like more CPU, more cores.
Speaking of folding applications, Mark Pelletier from Futures in Biotech would like to have us on his show or come on our show so we can talk about building the ultimate folding machine for his biotech applications. If you guys are interested in that, we should.
I think the Air Force may have done it already.
But he doesn't have it. He doesn't want to do it theoretically. He wants actually to do it.
Yeah, I'm sure we can help him with that. It'll be a matter of whether or not he's trying to use very, very high-end consumer work, high-end consumer-based hardware and like workstation materials, or if he's going super ultra expensive type stuff. But I think he has a tighter budget than say NASA and that kind of stuff. So I think we'd be able to.
NASA's budget's pretty tight these days.
Yeah, it is.
True. All right, our last Twitter question comes from Ryan10AD. He asks, or he says, my Time Machine drive died today. What is the best reasonable cost 1 terabyte hard drive on the market that will last for years? Thanks. I put this one in here at the end because we can give you recommendations for what drive you should want, and then if you listen to last week's episode, we talk about all these different drives that die. We can't guarantee anything was going to work for years, but I would say most of them are. We
can give you good recommendations about what you should not have bought 2 years ago.
Don't buy an IBM Death Star. Don't buy the first generation of 7200.11 Seagate 1.5 terabyte hard drives, but see, all those are gone.
And if you do, you can just update the firmware.
Yeah. But a reasonable cost 1 terabyte hard drive is just about any of them. Go to Newegg, go to Amazon, sort by lowest price, and then buy. In reality, and we talked about it on the show last week. We found 2 terabyte hard drives for $119.99. I think that sale is over. And I think 1 terabyte hard drives you can probably get for $89 right now. I think. Yeah.
If you shop carefully from Western Digital or Seagate or Hitachi, I would imagine they should all be well under $100. Any of them should do absolutely great for you. Scott Moulton, who was a guest on Techzilla a couple weeks ago, pointed out that he's seeing a lot of Western Digital drives because of a failure on the board on the back of the drive. Some parts are failing. Seagate had some troubles a couple of years ago. You mentioned the IBM Death Stars, which became the Hitachi Death Stars, but Hitachi seems to be doing a really good job these days on the 1 terabyte drives. I think Seagate's doing a good job. The truth is most hard drives don't fail, no matter what brand you buy.
Yeah.
But you should back up to a second hard drive, or better yet, to maybe a cloud-based backup system like Carbide or Mozy. Yeah, backing up is really good. Having multiple copies of everything is really good. Having a copy that's not stored inside of your house is really good.
Sign up for Carbonite and have a NAS.
Absolutely. Belts and suspenders and duct tape and string and another belt and suspenders. We also live in we live in earthquake country out here.
Yeah, that's true.
We're waiting for the ground to open up and swallow the house, or the house to collapse and then the entire block to burn when the gas lines light on fire. So
I'm not going to cry when it happens because I understand that's the cost of living here.
we got this balmy weather, and just a couple of years ago, it was down to 38 one winter for a day.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, it was pretty terrifying. Got out the wool clothes for a couple hours, but the flip side is that if something goes horribly wrong, like a big old 7+ on the Richter scale earthquake, like they've been having all up and down the Pacific Rim. My house, the block that my house is on will probably A, collapse, and then B, burn to the ground. So having those special moments backed up somewhere, relatively underground in Nebraska sounds really good to me.
Nice. I did see a note in our chat room that you could get Western Digital green 1 terabyte drives for $69.
Wow, that's a good drive. That's half what I paid for a set of those a year ago.
Very nice. If you want to send us Twitter questions for next week, you can follow me. I am at Ryan Shrout on Twitter. Usually on Thursday afternoon sometime, I begin to query the field for questions, and we get many questions in now, which is great, and then we select a few to answer on there. So we're going to wrap up the show here. Patrick, good to have you on again. Where can we find you at? Techzilla is the one of the 2 shows you do on Revision 3.
Yeah, Techzilla, TEKZILLA.com. Do that with Veronica Belmont. Actually, our new episode just came out. We talk about WiGig versus Gigabit Ethernet, Google's new Editions bookstore, how to clean your car battery to keep your engine CPU from dying, and some really fun stuff with techno toilets and the ultimate case for protecting your laptop.
Yeah, actually, I counted once, and there are more buttons on the toilet at Google than there are on their homepage.
That's a really frightening thing to think about, because I don't read or speak Japanese, and I had a very, I'll call it, interesting altercation with I went from the sort of, if you've ever been to Japan, there's this sort of toilet extreme you go through.
Dude, I've had one thank me after I.
Mine didn't thank me.
Arigatou gozaimashita.
Yeah, I got the cold water rinse, and it was just unexpected and terribly.
Front rinse or rear rinse?
Let's just not go into it. It's just not pleasant for anybody.
Yeah, please.
Not the computer hardware I was looking for.
No, especially not scented and cold.
The worst is they have that button that makes the flushing noise, so you can pee privately. But unfortunately, it sounds like it comes out of a little speaker, which it does. So everyone knows that you're making a fake flushing noise. It makes no sense whatsoever to me.
Nice.
Cultural differences.
All right, Colleen, where can everybody find you at?
Twitter.com/digitalkitty, and I work for Twit until the end of next week. So I'll probably be here on this show next week.
And she doesn't. All right, and you can find me, like I said, Twitter, at Ryan Shrout. You can find all the work and news and hardware articles that we write at pcper.com. If you want to see maybe a comparison of some high-end storage, I did some brief testing quad 600 gig Velociraptors and RAID 5 array versus a pair of 256 gig SSDs in RAID 0, and compared Premiere Pro CS5 performance and experiences with that. So you can see that there as well. And then if you want to find us, the Twitch show, it's at twit.tv/Twitch. We record live at live.twit.tv every Thursday.
On your Roku, on your iPhone, on your Android device, on your
that's right.
Yahoo connected television.
We are video, not just audio now.
Oh, iTunes. You can subscribe to our video and audio on iTunes.
Can we subscribe on Zune yet? I did have a question.
Should be.
Okay. All right.
I asked Dane to submit us there, and
I know it takes a little bit longer on the Zune network because I don't think we have as much of an in as we do with the iTunes people. But the point is,
we have more of
we are everywhere. We should now be everywhere, almost everywhere. Anywhere where you can find Twit on video, you should be able to find Twitch now on video. And I think that's super exciting because everybody needs to see more of me and Patrick and Colleen on their screens everywhere they go.
You and Patrick.
Well, we got at least one more episode with you, so we'll be all right. So with that, we will end the show, and we will see you next week. Thanks for watching or listening.